The Padres and White Sox are hitting home runs left and right and are two of the most exciting teams in baseball right now. The Mets are set to resume play today after COVID-19 postponements. A new number two in this week's power rankings and history for Albert Pujols. A lot to discuss today on the show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this Tuesday, August 25th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. As always, streaming live on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, as well as twitch.tv/110sports. We do have a lot to discuss today, a lot of weekend developments. League-wide offense is back up. It's something we discussed last week. Pitching had the upper hand, but offense is back up. Plus, could this finally be the Dodgers' year? They're off to a sensational start. There's hardly any holes in that team at all. Could this finally be their year? Plus, what can we expect leading up to the trade deadline? It's less than a week away, and it's going to be a very unique trade deadline, of course, because of the circumstances. But what can we expect? Is it going to be a quiet trade deadline? What kind of deals could we see? And how many buyers and sellers are really out there? We'll discuss that here today on the show. A busy day of action. So let's get right into today's rundown. This is what you can expect. We're going to start with our top four. As always, we'll discuss the Mets resuming play after another COVID-19 situation. A positive test caused the Mets to be the fourth team to have to pause their season. Like I mentioned, offense is back up league-wide. Some interesting early trends we discussed last week that seem to be evening out, but there are still some interesting ramifications. We'll discuss that. Plus the Dodgers' success and some quick hits, including history for Albert Pujols. As mentioned, we'll get into some news and notes, as we always do here on this show, a quick rundown of some other important items, and then as we always do on our Tuesday shows, we will dive into our power rankings spotlight. As I mentioned, the Padres, the White Sox, they've made their way into the top 10, so what teams have fallen out? Where do things stand right now? Where is the clear division in separating the great teams from the okay teams from the they're selling at the trade deadline teams? We'll discuss that coming up, plus what you can expect leading up to the trade deadline. As I said, that's all coming up today on this show. So let's just go ahead and dive right in because, as you can tell, we have a lot to cover. We'll start with our top four, and we'll start with the Mets. The Mets are set to return to action today after two members of their traveling party tested positive for COVID-19 late last week, forcing the postponement of 4 games, including a weekend series against the Yankees. As I mentioned here a moment ago, the Mets became the fourth team to be shut down for a period due to positive COVID-19 tests, following the Marlins, the Cardinals, and then the Reds. The good news is that, at this point, those two positives appear to be the full extent of the situation, as Major League Baseball announced that all subsequent tests from the team have come back negative, that announcement coming out yesterday, and General Manager Brodie Van Wagenen told reporters yesterday of the Mets that the player and staff member who had tested positive experienced symptoms but are both feeling better. The league announced the revised schedule for the team to make up their 4 missed games on Monday. The Mets are slated to play 34 games in the final 34 days of the regular season. Certainly going to be a busy schedule for them, but they're certainly not alone. You've got the Marlins and the Cardinals among teams with a lot of games coming up here in the final stretch of this season. With that in mind, it appears right now, as of this moment, that we could have all 30 MLB teams in action today for the first time since July 26th. Almost a month. Now, I said this before on multiple occasions, I think at least each of the last 2 weeks, that it looked like we were close to having all 30 teams playing on the same day, and it hasn't happened. We got so close so many times. There's certainly plenty of time before all these games get underway today, so who knows what could happen. Obviously, we're hoping for the best. We shall see if we get all 30 teams in action today for the first time in basically a month, which was 3 or 4 days into, I believe, 3 or 4 days into the start of the regular season was the last time we had every team in action. So that's our first top 4 item. We'll dive into number 2 here. A week ago today, we talked here on the show about some league-wide trends to begin the season. A good portion of that was related to decreased offense that we had seen. It seems in the past few weeks, though, that things have leveled off with an offensive explosion Taylor Bechtold of Stats Inc. with a story yesterday breaking down the numbers that I found especially interesting and useful. He wrote that he looked at the numbers and he found that, roughly 2 weeks into the regular season, hitters around the league were hitting a collective 230 with a 275 batting average on balls in play and a 713 OPS. Now, that average, 230 through the first 2 weeks of the season, was easily on pace to be the lowest in Major League Baseball history, behind even the mark set in 1968, which was 237, which was so alarming that it then led Major League Baseball to lower the mound. And that 275 BABIP, which, again, it's the batting average on balls in play. When a player puts the ball into the field of play, what's their batting average? That 275 mark is extremely low. Of course, it's not a number we talk about a lot, but that 275 number was on pace to be the league's lowest since 1972. And that's the kind of stuff we mentioned. We talked about an article from Jeff Passan last week, a week ago today here on the show. But things are changing now. And Bechtold writing that since August 10th, Major League batters are hitting closer to their normal levels with a 255 average, a BABIP of about 300, and a 773 OPS, up from 713. And teams have in the last couple of weeks combined for basically 10 runs a game instead of shy of 9 runs a game, which it doesn't seem like a lot, but collectively when you're talking about the league altogether, a jump like that is significant. Those recent numbers are much more in line with last year's league-wide numbers. The 2019 season last year featured the highest home run total of all time in a season and the fourth most total runs in MLB history. And we've certainly seen some anecdotal evidence here in recent days with the Padres and the White Sox smashing home runs left and right. And we'll talk more about them in just a bit, but there are a few other factors to consider here. First, there have been some studies and some evidence indicating an increase in drag on the baseball this season compared to last year, when the ball, as we mentioned, was flying out of the yard at a historic rate. And that increased drag that appears to be on the baseball this year, it seems like the baseballs are different again. That would logically lead to a decrease in offense. So Bechtold also looked at what could be offsetting that if things are pretty much normal, or pretty much like they were last year right now. And he was basically found that more pitchers are making their MLB debuts this season than in recent years. This due to an increase in injuries, which among pitchers, which we've talked about before, which can possibly be attributed in significant portion to the nature of the season and the quick restart. It's also worth noting that pitchers have been throwing their off-speed pitches more frequently this season. In the last few weeks, though, batting average against all types of pitches has gone up. It's also possible, and this is something I believe we talked about last week, that hitters were simply behind pitchers to start the season, because Major League batters, they don't get the chance to, they can't really replicate squaring off against Major League caliber pitchers during the shutdown period that they had. They really only had a couple weeks in spring training to really face Major League caliber pitchers, whereas those pitchers, obviously they couldn't really face batters that much, but they could still there's a difference in the way that batters and hitters prepare for the season, and it seemed like maybe the pitchers were just ahead of the batters. And now the batters seem to have found their rhythm. Overall, though, the moral of the story this is that things seem to be evening out just fine. This isn't anything groundbreaking, but it was something we mentioned last week, that hitting was really struggling, batting average was down, all this, but things seem to be evening out, and that's what I wanted to point out. It doesn't look so extreme anymore, but it's something we'll keep an eye on moving forward the rest of the season. I mean, does this recent surge continue and it become an incredible offensive year, or does that even back out, and where does it all land? Of course, we're talking about smaller sample sizes because we're only a month into the season. All right, our next top 4 item today. There's really no questioning that the Dodgers are the best team in baseball this season. I suppose, you can make an argument for the Yankees or the Rays. The A's are great. I mean, obviously, there are a number of really great teams, but I don't really think there's an argument against the Dodgers being the best team in baseball this season. But as we've seen plenty of times, that doesn't necessarily guarantee great success in October. The Dodgers have reached the playoffs in 7 straight years, and in 2017 and 2018, they lost in the World Series. Last year was a first round exit to the eventual world champion Nationals in the divisional series. The Dodgers are trying to get over the hump that this season, and the expectations are great. So far, the results have been great as well. Dave Roberts' club became the first in baseball to reach 20 wins, and the team has won 11 of its last 12 games. The Dodgers currently have a 22-8 record. It is their best 30-game start to a season in nearly 40 years. Last time they got off to such a good start, 1983. Now their current pace translates to a 118-44 record over the pace of a full season. For the record, the MLB record for wins in a season, 116. Dodgers are on pace for 118-44 over a 162 game season. Of course, that's not to say that they're going to be able to keep up this pace, but just something to indicate how successful they've been this year. It's hard to find many flaws in this team right now. Prior to yesterday's games, when I looked at the numbers, the Dodgers third in OPS, first in runs scored, first in home runs, first in ERA, that includes second in starting pitcher ERA, first in relief pitcher ERA, in all of baseball. Again, in all of baseball, third in OPS, first in runs scored, first in homers, first in ERA. The bullpen's been great. The rotation's been great. So let's talk about the pitching side a little bit. Like always, the Dodgers have incredible pitching depth. Despite a couple of key losses, Kenta Maeda now with the Twins and doing great. Rich Hill also with the Twins. Hyunjin Ryu in Toronto. Well, he's not in Toronto. Team's not in Toronto with the Blue Jays this season. Despite this, they still have incredible pitching depth and young pitchers who are stepping up in a big way. Dustin May with a 2.79 ERA. He's been great. Walker Buehler got off to a rough start, but his last outing, he looked much more like what people expected of him. 6 innings, 1 earned run, 11 strikeouts, no walks. And then there's Clayton Kershaw, who last week moved into second place on the Dodgers' all-time strikeouts list. The 32-year-old has been really dominant this season. 3-1 record, a 2.25 ERA, 29 strikeouts to 4 walks in 24 innings. The most interesting aspect about Kershaw here is that after 4 straight years with a decline in velocity, Kershaw's velocity is now up significantly this season. He's throwing the hardest he's thrown since 2017, when he finished second in Cy Young balloting. And I found this interesting information, an MLB.com story from David Adler, in which he writes, to put Kershaw's velocity inflection in context, MLB StatCast database guru Jason Bernard looked at all instances in the pitch tracking era since 2008 of a regular starter losing fastball velocity for 4 or more years in a row. Only a handful were able to break the downward trend and regain any velocity at all. None added back as much velo as Kershaw. So his velocity has been declining, like I said, 4 years in a row. Now he's still pitching well. Last year he really impressed. He was good. He was very good. He was not, the Clayton Kershaw we saw, earlier in the decade as one of the best pitchers in, posting ERAs around 2. He wasn't the best pitcher in baseball, but he was really good last year. This year, though, you just don't see pitchers who are declining like that in their velocity. He's being crafty to get results, but now he's seeing an uptick in velocity, and maybe that has to do with the shortened season. Maybe it's a conscious decision to just give it more, put more into it because he knows he's not pitching as many innings. Maybe it's because last year he was coming back off of an injury to begin this season. Either way, Clayton Kershaw, at this point, certainly in contention for the NL Cy Young. I wouldn't pick him as my winner, but certainly top 5 if I was voting on that today. Of course, we're only halfway into the season. A lot can change, and either way, though, great to see from Clayton Kershaw. Bullpen's also been great. Kenley Jansen, there was real concern about decline from him, and it's still there's still risk, but he's been great for the Dodgers at the back end of that bullpen as well. Offensively, well, you heard the ranks for the Dodgers there, as I mentioned. Third in OPS, first in runs scored, first in home runs, heading into yesterday's action. There's so much star power in that Dodgers lineup, and even with not everybody performing at a super high level, this is one of the best offenses in baseball, if not the best. I mean, it's been the best. And that's without everybody performing at a high level. Cody Bellinger got off to a bad start. He was still stealing a couple bases, hitting some home runs, but it was a really bad start, and that didn't slow the Dodgers. And now he's hitting .304 with 4 homers over his last 7 games. Corey Seager, he missed some time, probably most of a week, at least 5 or so days with an injury, if not more, with a back situation. But that didn't slow him, and Corey Seager's has a 925 OPS, 7 homers, 20 RBIs. He's crushing the baseball. And then there's Mookie Betts, who's been everything, he's come as advertised and so much more. Betts recently became the first player in Dodgers history with 2 homers and 2 steals in the same game. He's batting .300 with 11 home runs, 25 runs, 25 RBIs, 5 stolen bases. Just so much fun to watch on a baseball field is Mookie Betts. Obviously, so much attention is rightly being paid to some of the very youngest stars in the game, Fernando Tatis, Juan Soto, and others. So it can be easy to sort of like, oh, Mookie Betts has been great. He's already won an MVP, and it's like, somehow, despite the fact he's not old. He's not old at all. But it's old news compared to all these incredibly young players coming up and making an impact. Mookie Betts, one of the very best in the game. So much fun to watch. Now you add Bellinger, Seager, and Betts with Justin Turner, Max Muncy, A.J. Pollock, and more great players that they have this incredible depth. You've got an elite offense. Overall, the Dodgers have a plus 79 run differential. That's easily the best in baseball. When I looked at the run differential, the standings yesterday, the next closest team in run differential was Minnesota, plus 40. So their Dodgers run differential is basically double that of the next closest team. I mean, it's just hard to find. I mean, when you have a team that has that incredible of an offense, they could have an average pitching staff and be a great team. You combine that incredible pitching staff with an average offense, and they'd be a great team. You combine that incredible offense with that incredible pitching staff, though, and you've got a sensational team. However, like I've said, the Dodgers have been close to a World Series title before in recent years. They've been to the playoffs year after year. Just because you're the favorite, just because you're the best team on paper, it does not mean you're going to win the World Series. As we've seen a ton of times in recent years in just the history of baseball, and particularly the nature of this year's postseason could make that even more so because 16 teams make the postseason. There's going to be chaos. And the nature of the first round of the playoffs. There's no first round buys, anything like that. So the Dodgers, let's say they're the first seed in all of baseball. They'll play a team that is not normally going to be in the playoffs under normal circumstances, but it could still be a good team with nothing to lose in a 3-game series. That's how what's called the wild card round this year is going to be. 3-game series. Now it'll be, right now it's supposed to be on the team with the better record, the higher seeds home field, but that could even change as baseball considers its bubble or hub situation, which is seeming more likely. So you got a best of 3 series. And yeah, the Dodgers are incredible, but we've seen, throughout the course of a season, great teams can be swept by horrible teams in the regular season in a 3-game series. So it's going to be interesting to see if that, I could just see a situation in which we look back and say the Dodgers are so clearly the best team in baseball that they went into the postseason. They went up against the the Padres, for example. Maybe the Padres won't be that last seed, but well, maybe the Phillies or the Mets. Some team, that's competent goes, wins two of three, and all of a sudden the Dodgers are done. That could happen. Hopefully, though, I picked the Dodgers to win the World Series. There's just so much talent. I kind of want to see this continue, and I'm not, sitting here as a great Dodgers fan or anything, but they're just so much fun to watch right now. And if they continue to dominate in this way, like, I don't want to see them out of the first round of the playoffs. We'll see, though. I mean, who knows what'll happen. All right, final top 4 point of the day. A couple quick hits for you. Albert Pujols, the LA Angels slugger, has surpassed Albert Pujols for sole possession of second place on MLB's RBI list. Pujols recorded his 2,087th RBI of his career after singling off of the Astros' Framber Valdez to score Mike Trout in the 5th inning of yesterday's game against the Astros. Hank Aaron remains in first place on that list with 2,297 RBI, while Babe Ruth technically has more RBI than Pujols in his career. The statistic didn't become an officially recognized statistic by the league until 1920, meaning that Babe Ruth only gets credited for just shy of 2,000, which is good enough for 6th all time. So there are people who were saying, that Babe Ruth is ahead of Albert Pujols. But the official record book, the official way that's going to go down in history, Albert Pujols, future Hall of Famer with the second most RBI of any player in Major League Baseball history. Another item for you here. We've talked before about all the injuries we've seen this season so far. Pitchers in particular, have landed on the IL at an increased rate this season. And I predicted back before the season started that the nature of the short ramp-up of this season, the shortened spring training or training camp, would contribute to more injuries, particularly among pitchers. And we've seen that. We've seen star pitchers like Steven Strasburg, Justin Verlander, Madison Bumgarner, and several others go down with injuries. Some teams have been hit really hard, like the Tampa Bay Rays and the Houston Astros. We've talked about Dusty Baker's comments that the nature of the season led to, could be contributing to, he believes is contributing to increased pitcher injuries. Now, it's pretty much impossible to draw a straight line between the shortened ramp up to the season and the start-stop nature of what's happened in the past several months to any particular injury. And so many of these injuries that we've seen this year would have happened regardless. But we're continuing to see more players speaking out about the impact of the shortened season. And the Yankees' James Paxton, the starter, has been shut down for a couple of weeks as he deals with a forearm strain. He got off to a really rocky start to the season. Paxton telling the Associated Press, "I think it's pretty simple. We didn't get enough time at the lower speed to kind of build up. The tiredness is building up. We don't have that base we normally have." Teammate Zach Britton, the reliever, one of the only few Yankees players who didn't hit the IL last year, is now out, sidelined on the injured list with a hamstring strain. He said this year's very unique. There's just a ton of injuries throughout the game. That's to be expected just due to ramping up so quickly. So I won't stay on this point very long. But again, it seems like, though we can't draw any straight lines from the nature of the season to a particular injury, we got players, we got managers speaking out, saying that that's contributing to an increased number of injuries, which obviously sucks. You never want to have a lot of injuries. I will say one thing that's come with it is we've seen so many prospects debut this season that we thought might not be the case. They just keep coming up. They keep impressing. Pitchers, hitters, we talked about that on Thursday's show, so I won't get into that. But it's been an interesting storyline to watch, though we never want injuries to star players or any players. Next up here in a quick hits, the Cardinals with a win over the Royals last night. St. Louis moved to 8-5 after their return from their COVID-19 layoff, and 10-8 on the season. The Cubs have a huge lead in that division, but Milwaukee and Cincinnati are both multiple games below 500, and Pittsburgh is just bad. So there's an opportunity here for the Cardinals. Paul Goldschmidt, after a 3-hit day yesterday, is hitting .368 on the season with an on-base percentage of .507. He's been getting on base in more than half his at-bats this season. This is a guy who's been a slow starter in recent years. People were really expecting some decline. It looks like he's on the decline. He's off to a great start this season. His OPS of was 1.068 is the fourth highest in the National League behind only Bryce Harper, Mike Yastrzemski, and Fernando Tatis Jr. Meanwhile, Jack Flaherty, the Cardinals' young ace with 5 shutout innings against the Royals yesterday, he lowered his season ERA to 1.98. Combine his start to this season with his breakout down the stretch in 2019, and Flaherty, as Drew Silva of Roto World pointed out last night, Jack Flaherty in his last 120 innings, dating back to July 7th, 2019, a 1.05 ERA, 142 strikeouts in 120 innings. Wow. He's continuing to get off to a great start this year. Looks like a real transformation from Flaherty. Going to be one of the better pitchers in the National League for years to come. Final note here in our quick hits. I want to highlight just real briefly here a name you probably haven't heard of who's having a great season. It's Marlins starting pitcher Pablo Lopez. Certainly wasn't a name to really know too much last year from a performance perspective, a 5.09 ERA and 21 starts last year for the Marlins. This season, after 5 strong innings last night against Washington, Pablo Lopez, a 1.98 ERA and a 3-1 record in 5 starts. Definitely a name to watch out for is Marlins starter Pablo Lopez. All right, we're going to take our first break here on the show. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and dive into some news and notes, as promised. We'll go through those real briefly, and then we'll dive into this week's Power Ranking Spotlight. After that, a quick discussion about what to expect leading up to the trade deadline. That is all ahead. Stay with us. This is ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports, streaming live on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports, also available on demand on the website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Just search for 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. Let's go ahead and dive right back into today's program, what we've got for you, because we still have a lot to get to here as we approach the bottom of the hour on this August 25th. Let's dive into our news and notes for today. Just a couple quick items to go through here. MLB's TV ratings are up through the first month of the regular season. Despite competition from the NBA and NHL playoffs, this first reported by Daniel Kaplan of The Athletic late last week, the demographics fueling the rise the most, women and younger people. Major League Baseball also announced on Sunday that the Indians and Angels will square off in Williamsport, Pennsylvania next year in the 2021 MLB Little League Classic. The game will be almost exactly a year from now on August 22nd, and Cleveland will serve as the home team. The Angels and Indians players will attend the Little League Baseball World Series games, or some of those games, prior to their game that day. This year's game between the Orioles and Red Sox was canceled due to the pandemic. Cleveland Indians manager Terry Francona is missing the team's three-game series against the Twins this week while he continues to deal with health issues. Best wishes to him in his recovery. The Diamondbacks placed right-handed pitcher Merrill Kelly on the IL with a nerve impingement in his right shoulder. He was a possible trade chip for the team, although even if he wasn't, he was really impressing this season. 3-2 record, 2.59 ERA. He'd walked 5 and struck out 29 in roughly 31 innings. And some news just in a few minutes ago. Hurricane Laura has forced Major League Baseball to postpone tomorrow's game between the Astros and Angels in Houston. The game has been rescheduled as part of a doubleheader September 5th in Anaheim, beginning at 4:05 p.m. Pacific time. Finally, the Braves activated outfielder Ronald Acuna Jr. from the injured list this morning. The 22-year-old star had been out since August 11th due to left wrist inflammation. All right, let's go ahead and dive into our power ranking spotlight for the day. First, a couple of overall thoughts on my power rankings this week. A couple new teams entered the top 10, the White Sox and the Padres. We'll discuss them coming up. Really, it's becoming more and more clear to me each week I do this that we're getting more obvious separation between the great teams, the clearly, great teams, the teams that I'm considered to put in my top 10, there's about 13 of them. And then there's another group of about, let's say, 5 or 6 that I'm like, okay, I could see these teams being really good. They just haven't found it yet. And then after that, it's like, I don't think so. There's becoming more clear divide. And there is a new number 2 in this week's power ranking, so we'll discuss that coming up. But before we get to some teams that are trending up and a discussion about some of those top teams, let's start by talking about some teams that are trending down. And we'll start with the Texas Rangers. Last week, the Rangers had jumped up into 20th in my power rankings after winning 7 of their last 9 games, but since then, the team has dropped 7 straight games before their win against the A's last night. The Rangers enter the week with an OPS in August that was the 3rd worst in baseball, and an ERA in August of 5.65. That's the 4th worst in baseball. Not great. They look like, at this point, they're becoming possible or probable sellers at the trade deadline. The Rangers now 6 games below 500. Todd Frazier, one player to keep an eye on who could potentially get moved. He's impressed so far this season, playing first and third base for the Rangers. He could be one option, one player who could be dealt at the trade deadline. Another team that's trending down is the Philadelphia Phillies, who I'm not going to sugarcoat this. They're frankly wasting the incredible talent of Bryce Harper and JT Realmuto. Harper with an OPS above 1100. JT Realmuto, the best catcher in baseball, 8 homers, 22 RBI right now, incredible defense. They're wasting that talent. There's so much talent on that roster, but the team has lost 5 of its last 6 games. They're in the cellar of the NL East and a bullpen ERA of 8.29 for the season. It is absolutely appalling. As the team has acquired last week veteran relievers Brandon Workman and Heath Hembree from the Red Sox to try to help the situation. It was a clear win-now move. They would not be making that trade if they didn't think they could pull out of it and still compete in the NL East to compete for a playoff spot, which at 10-14, sure, they absolutely can. But Workman blew a save in his very first appearance. His second appearance, he did get a save, but it wasn't exactly pretty. The bullpen continues to melt down for the Phillies. Maybe we'll see them make another trade for more bullpen arms. I don't know. There's talent on this roster, make no mistake, but the Phillies are going to have to get this turned around in a hurry. Another team that is trending down is the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers are 12-15 as they got swept by the Pirates, the 30th ranked team in my power rankings for this week and the last several weeks over this past weekend. And that kind of tells you what you need to know about the Brewers right now. This is a talented team, but a team that coming into the season I worried They let too much talent go. There were too many holes in that rotation, and they let Mike Moustakas and I'm blanking on some of the other names. They lost a couple of big offensive. Oh, Yasmani Grandal. They lost a couple of big offensive pieces. They didn't really replace them. They brought in a bunch of depth options, but no real star power. And I was concerned about that. And they're 12-15, certainly not out of it in their own right, but entered the week with a team ERA of 4.79, an OPS of 6.77 in the month of August. That's not helping matters. Like I said, though, they're still in it. They're still, they're 18th in my power rankings. And if I didn't mention it, I think I may have not mentioned that the Rangers, 20th last week, 24th this week. The Phillies were pretty much soundly in the middle of the pack in my power rankings to begin the season. They fell back to 20th. The Brewers were 16th last week, 18th this week in the power rankings. Another team that's falling in my power rankings, the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds are 11-16. They were 12th last week. They're 15th this week. It hurts me to say this because the Reds were my pick to win the NL Central. And it was a bit of a bold pick, but not an extremely bold pick, and I really believed in the Reds. It's been 754 days since Sonny Gray gave up more than six hits in a start. Think about that for a second. We're also getting to see the great version of Trevor Bauer this year. The right-hander recently became the first pitcher in the modern baseball era to strike out 40 batters with fewer than 10 hits allowed over his first 4 starts of the year. Bauer has a 1.65 ERA, 49 strikeouts in 32 2/3 innings this season. But despite having 2 of the top pitchers in the NL Cy Young race right now, and a sizable group of talented hitters, Joey Votto, Mike Moustakas, Nick Castellanos, Eugenio Suarez, and more, Cincinnati still hasn't been able to get any traction. They've lost 3 in a row, 5 of their last 7. They're still not too far from a playoff spot. But I just can't keep making excuses for a team that's just not getting results. I don't fully understand it. And, they're a good week away from being at the basically around 500, and then from there, who knows, Team could easily make the playoffs. I say easily. A team could certainly make the playoffs with a record around 500 in this format. So I'm not giving up hope on the Reds being good, but I think it's fair to say I'm giving up hope on them winning the NL Central. I don't think that's going to happen at this point. Final team that's trending down here I want to highlight today is the Colorado Rockies. They were 10th in my power rankings last week. They cracked the top 10. They were on fire. But, when I had them in the when I had them at 10th last week, they cooled off a little, but they were still, a pretty big hot streak. But they'd started to cool off. And that cooling off has continued. As fast as the Rockies became one of the hottest teams in baseball, they've now become one of the coldest. They've lost 7 games in a row prior to their win against the Diamondbacks last night. They've dropped 12 of their last 17 games. After their early success, Colorado's pitching staff has let it down recently, surrendering double-digit runs in 3 of their last 5 games entering the week. A 5.19 ERA in August heading into yesterday's game. Nolan Arenado has 7 home runs, but he's still struggling to get it going, a .223 batting average for Arenado. The Rockies basically at the end of the group of teams that I see as potentially being really good. Some people I've seen, I'm not the only one doing power rankings. I've seen the Rockies dropping significantly in others' power rankings, but I don't think we can ignore just how incredible their start to the season was. They're still in that group of teams. They're at 14-15 on the season. They're 14th in my power rankings. They're still, at the back end of that group of teams who I think could be really good. Not that they're as good as the teams in the top 5, but a team that, could get things turned around and, again, push the top 10 again. But they're going to have to get things back on track because if they continue like they have been, they're going to fall significantly in the NL West, playoff race, power rankings, everything. So those are a look at 5 teams that are trending down. Let's talk about 5 teams that are trending up in this week's power rankings and by nature just in general trending up. The San Francisco Giants. This is something I certainly did not see coming. The Giants have now won 6 straight games and are just 2 games under 500 for the season. at 14 and 16. Top prospect Joey Bart, the projected successor to Buster Posey behind the plate, is off to a strong start at the plate and in the field. He became just the 10th Giants player since 1901 with an extra base hit in his first 2 major league games, as he got the call last week. Infielder Wilmer Flores, who's been an underrated player for a couple of years now, you'll remember him with the Mets, is hitting .306 with 7 home runs to begin the season. Mike Yastrzemski, we've talked about him a lot in the outfield, looks like a star. He looks like one of the better outfielders in baseball. So the Giants, like I said, they've won 6 straight, just a couple games under 500, a better record than the Brewers and the Reds and other teams we expected to be much better. There's no real reason to expect their recent success to continue. We should note these 6 straight wins came against the Angels and then the Diamondbacks. But there's still some fun storylines to follow here. I certainly don't expect the Giants to be all of a sudden in the playoff picture, in a couple weeks from now, but kind of goes to show that, there's few teams that are truly out of it, and a hot streak for anybody, given the short length of the season to date, can put pretty much anybody close to contention. And it might mean the Giants aren't big-time sellers at the deadline. I don't know. We'll see. Another team that's trending up is the Toronto Blue Jays. They are 14 and 13 on the season. They made easily the biggest jump in my power rankings. They were 23rd last week, which, looking back on it, I guess they had really been doing poorly, but I still can't believe I had them at 23rd. They're 12th in this week's power rankings. With 7 victories in their last 9 games, the Blue Jays may be hitting their stride now, and all of a sudden they look like a probable playoff team. Fangraphs gives them almost a 2/3 chance of making the playoffs. Randall Grichuk is red hot. Kevin Biggio, it looks like the real deal at second base. Outfielder Teoscar Hernandez leads the team with 10 home runs. They're hoping to get Bo Bichette, their star young shortstop, back before long. There's some glaring holes, though, particularly in the rotation for the Blue Jays. Behind Hyunjin Ryu, there's all sorts of injuries. Top prospect Nate Pearson, Matt Shoemaker, Trent Thornton, they're all on the IL. This team appears to be one of the biggest teams interested in starting pitching prior to the trade deadline. They all of a sudden look like a probable playoff team, and that's really exciting. This was a team that I thought, with their young talent, could be really fun, could make a playoff push. All of a sudden, it's looking like that's pretty likely. Next 2 teams here, as I mentioned, they are 2 of the most exciting teams in baseball right now. Let's start with the San Diego Padres, 18 and 12 record. Where to even begin with the Padres? Oh my gosh, they've been so much fun. The whole Fernando Tatis swinging 3-0 with a big league thing, that's discussions in the rearview mirror. But the 21-year-old's incredible start certainly is not in the rearview mirror. The shortstop still doing incredible things. He leads baseball in home runs, RBI, runs scored. He's tied for second in steals. The NL MVP favorite right now. The Padres have won 7 games in a row. It's the first time they've done that in 7 years, with sweeps of the Rangers and the Astros. The Astros had previously won 8 straight before that series. They're now 18 and 12, their best 30-game start to a season in 10 years. They're hitting home runs left and right. This past week, the Padres broke the MLB record, as you probably saw, with grand slams in 4 consecutive games. They also became the first team in MLB history with 5 grand slams in a 6-game span. The Padres are tied with the White Sox for the second most home runs in baseball, and are also second in baseball in total runs scored. It's not just Tatis performing at a high level in that offense. Second baseman Jake Cronenworth, probably a player you've never heard of, a good chance of that. An OPS over 1,000 with 3 homers, 8 doubles in 24 games. Will Myers has 7 home runs. It looks like he's rebounded a bit after some really bad years. Manny Machado was just named NL Player of the Week after 3 homers and an average close to 400 last week. Eric Hosmer made a swing change, and it looks like it's paying off with more power and hitting the ball with more authority. And center fielder Trent Grisham had a multi-homer game last week. He's looked really good. The Padres, incredibly fun team to watch right now. I'm interested to see if they add maybe to the pitching staff for the trade deadline, maybe even a bullpen arm, because they've got a couple of bullpen arms, Kirby Yates, Drew Pomerantz, in the back end of the bullpen who are on the IL. So, boy, it would be fun to see the Padres make a key addition at the deadline and keep the good times going this season. They're an incredibly fun team, much like the Chicago White Sox, who are also one of the most exciting teams in baseball right now. The team recently hit 27 home runs in a 7-game stretch, the most home runs in such a period in MLB history. First baseman Jose Abreu, who was just named the AL Player of the Week, feasted on Cubs pitchers over this past weekend with 6 home runs in the series, tied for the most for any player in a 3-game series since at least 1913. Abreu also tied an MLB record with 4 home runs in 4 consecutive at-bats. The veteran first baseman, now leads the American League with 11 homers and 28 RBI. Meanwhile, outfielder Luis Robert, young superstar, has 5 home runs in his last 7 games. Outfielder Eloy Jimenez, up to 9 home runs. Shortstop Tim Anderson, an OPS north of 1,000. Lucas Giolito, who struggled to begin the season, recently became just the 3rd White Sox pitcher in the last 5 decades with at least 7 innings, 13 strikeouts, and 0 runs in a start. That is a mouthful, but that shows you how well things are going right now for the White Sox. It has been an incredible run over the last week or so for the White Sox. I wasn't kidding when I said home runs left and right, nonstop. That offense is so much fun to watch. It's incredible. The Padres and White Sox, oh man, it's just so much fun to watch them play right now. Hopefully they can keep it up. These are two teams with incredible young talent, incredibly fun players to watch, and I hope they can keep it up. This is a team that all of a sudden looks like they're a playoff team as well. Some people I have the Padres 9th in my power rankings, White Sox 8th. Both of them were pretty close to the top 10 last week as their hot streaks were beginning. And I saw some people move them up all the way to, top 5 in their power rankings. I didn't want to go that drastic because there's still some really, more established teams who've been doing it more or less all season long. But they keep this performance up, they're going to be rising even more in the power rankings. Final team here I want to mention as trending up here is the Tampa Bay Rays. They are that new number 2 team in this week's power rankings, despite some key injuries. Their pitching depth is being tested. Yanni Chirinos, Tommy John surgery. Brendan McKay, shoulder surgery. Nick Anderson, forearm inflammation. Those are just some of their recent pitching injuries. Despite those losses, Tampa Bay has been one of the hottest teams in baseball. They've won 14 of their last 18 games, including a recent sweep of the Yankees to move into first place in the AL East. They lost that first place by half a game with a loss yesterday. They're just half a game back of the Yankees. But they've been on an incredible run. They've got a great deal of momentum. I'd be interested to see if they maybe add to that pitching staff, to their bullpen, to their rotation at the deadline with the number of pitching injuries they have. Second baseman Brandon Lau is continuing to crush the baseball. We talked about him. He entered the week. We've talked about him before. He entered the week second in the AL in slugging percentage and third in OPS. So the Rays, incredibly fun right now. I have them at number 2 in this week's power rankings. The Dodgers, we talked about them. They're number 1. That hasn't changed. The Yankees come in, I believe, here at number 3. I lost my place on the page here. Let me just double check that here for you. Yeah, the Yankees remain at number 3 in this week's power rankings. Meanwhile, we have the A's coming in at 4. The Twins are 5th. The Cubs are 6th. Indians 7th. White Sox, Padres, and then the Braves round out the top 10. The Astros just fall out of the top 10, not really because of anything that they did, just by nature of wanting to promote the White Sox and the Padres in the rankings. All right, so that is our power rankings spotlight for this Tuesday, August 25th. We're going to go ahead and take our final break of the show, a quick one here. When we come back, instead of our stock watch this week, we're going to talk a little bit about the trade deadline, what we can expect in the next roughly week before the deadline. That's coming up next here on ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. Just a quick break there because I want to dive right into our last segment here with just about 10 minutes left in the broadcast, and that is what we might want to expect. What we should expect leading up to the trade deadline, which is less than a week away. It's coming up on Monday. 6 days from now is the MLB trade deadline. Usually, of course, July 31st this year, August 31st because of the structure of the season. We've seen a couple of trades happen so far. The Mariners traded first baseman and designated hitter Daniel Vogelbach to the Blue Jays for cash considerations. He was off to a horrible start, but was a 2019 All-Star. The really only real notable deal, though, has been the Red Sox trading closer Brandon Workman and fellow veteran reliever Heath Hembree to the Phillies for their right-handed pitchers Nick Pivetta and Connor Seabold. And we talked a little bit about that when we discussed the Phillies trending down and their efforts to stop that trending down. So not a lot of other action yet on the trade market, but still about a week left. So what can we expect? Because the nature of this season makes this a really interesting trade deadline. Of course, there are the players. There's the complications of players moving from one team to another during a pandemic, plus the risks that exist everywhere that a team could get shut down or miss games at any point. A lot of factors here. There's also the fact that with the expanded playoffs, with 16 teams getting in, that a lot more teams have a shot, and there are a few obvious sellers. So, what should we expect? ESPN's Jeff Passan writing just yesterday that, quote, "It comes down to this. Teams are profoundly risk adverse, and with so many of the risk mitigating factors absent, the appetite for trades is lost. Teams that need players don't want to gamble on a season they can't predict, and teams that want to dump players are uncomfortable working off old information." That's a bad combination. And one Passan describes old information. He's talking about the lack of scouting reports and information given the nature of this season. There's no typical minor league season, so the prospects that teams would be getting, they haven't necessarily been scouted recently. So, as he writes, that's a bad combination. That being said, I don't think it's going to be a completely quiet trade deadline. I think we'll continue to see a couple of moves at least. Passan writing that the possibility that Cleveland could deal Mike Clevinger remains the most intriguing potential trade possibility. Clevinger, of course, is at the team's alternative site after breaking protocols, traveling by heading out of the team's hotel in Chicago a couple weekends ago. Among the teams that are interested in starting pitchers, Atlanta, the Mets, the Rockies, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the A's, the Astros, the Cubs. Well, I mean, really, who isn't? Now, Passan identified the definite sellers as Pittsburgh, Boston, Kansas City, Seattle, and the Los Angeles Angels. He identified probable sellers as the Tigers, Orioles, and Marlins. And he identified possible sellers as the Giants and the Rangers. You'll notice, and I kind of rattled those off very quickly, but only one team from the National League, the Pirates, is listed there as a definite seller. That's because no other team in the National League is more than 3.5 games out of a playoff spot right now. 3.5 games, not that much. Obviously, it's something, but Pirates the only team in the National League that's more than 3.5 games out of a playoff spot. So, what do some of those potential sellers have to offer? It could be a busy trade deadline for the Red Sox, who after dealing Workman and Hembree, the team could continue selling. Outfielder Andrew Benintendi, off to a horrible start this season, on the injured list, is available, according to Ken Rosenthal, The Athletic. A report from the Boston Sports Journal the other day that the Red Sox are willing to include significant salary relief in deals to move contracts, so maybe that leads to discussions about J.D. Martinez. The Royals have Trevor Rosenthal, who seems like a likely candidate to be dealt, and other players that teams could ask about. The Angels are reportedly open for business, according to USA Today's Bob Nightingale, and they've already received numerous inquiries reportedly on right-hander Dylan Bundy. The Pirates have a big trade chip and closer Keone Keller, though he's been dealing with an injury. And then you have who's interested in buying, and that's basically everybody else. Atlanta wants rotation help, maybe a third baseman. The Indians need outfielders. The Athletics want starters. St. Louis could use an offensive boost. Buster Olney of ESPN hearing that from other teams that the Rays have been aggressive in trade talks. So it's hard to know what to do. And there's rumors and stuff all the time. I'm not going to get into every single report and rumor. And, hopefully by Thursday show, if not, then by Tuesday show, we'll have plenty of trades. We'll have some trades to talk about. Overall, I think maybe we'll see one notable, really, sort of surprise trade that sort of, maybe not a surprise, but maybe that one really big name, like a Mike Clevenger type or JD Martinez. I'm not. I think maybe we see one of those, and then just a number of like small to medium sized trades under the radar could have an impact, but not blockbuster. I don't think we're going to be seeing three or four blockbusters, and trade deadline day is going to be like sometimes in the past where it's like, you're on Twitter and it's like a new deal. Here's a new deal. A big trade here. I don't think it's going to be like that, but I think there'll still be some action. There are some definite sellers, some intriguing options out there, and a lot of teams that are looking to make the postseason in this format. Read what Jeff Passan wrote there, maybe it'll be pretty quiet because again, teams don't want to take a big risk on a season that's so fragile and circumstances that are so fragile in a playoff structure where you lose two games, where even the best teams, you lose 2 games in a row to begin the playoffs and you're done. So we'll see how it goes. We'll have a lot to discuss, I'm sure. We'll talk about the trade deadline in one way or another on Thursday's show as well. Who knows if we'll have trades by then or not. Usually doesn't pick up till closer to the deadline over the weekend, the beginning of next week. But we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, a lot to discuss, and we'll monitor it all. And that'll do it for today's edition of Around the Bases, though, from 110 Sports. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Chris Brown. A couple of reminders, as always. Our live coverage continues tomorrow with the J-Mull Show with Josh Molnix at 11 a.m. Eastern. And then on Thursday, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring at 11 a.m. Eastern as well. And then we're back with you at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursday with Around the Bases, discussing, where things stand. We're at the midway point of the season. We'll talk a little bit about that, what some of the biggest storylines are that happen over the next couple of days, whether we see some trades, some struggles, some rumors, whatever it might be. We'll discuss that coming up on Thursday as well. Make sure you go to 110sportsmedia.com. Right side of the homepage, you can subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out every Friday morning to your inbox, delivering the latest content, because we've got podcasts, multiple live shows, of course, written content coming out throughout the week. So you can subscribe to the newsletter, right side of the homepage, to get that in your inbox every Friday. And make sure to check out all the latest written content. Subscribe to the 110 Sports feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on the website. You can click on the videos tab and you can see all of our shows, our live shows available afterward on demand. So that's going to do it for our show today. Thanks so much for watching. A lot to discuss on Thursday. I'm sure we'll keep an eye on everything that happens in the baseball world over the next couple of days. As always, have a great rest of your Tuesday, a great Wednesday. Stay safe, and I will talk to you on Thursday.